need to go over, one that's potentially quite controversial as well. Before we begin, I do want to preference this first topic by saying, two things. First and foremost, we're going to be talking about the Japanese petition to have Assassin's Creed Shadows cancelled. The second, leading in from that, is just to reiterate that my Japanese isn't the best. So the words, when I'm pronouncing Japanese words, if I get them wrong, you'll have to accept my apologies. I think my Japanese isn't too bad, definitely better than my French. Second thing I want to get across is that I stumbled across this article on Reddit about 3 days ago now, and I kind of ignored it. I had assumed ignorantly that the petition was actually because of the character of Yasuke. Now, Yasuke is a historical figure in Japanese history. I had just assumed that a bunch of weeboos had decided to have the game cancelled simply because they were unaware that Yasuke was real. That is not the case at all. It's actually a little bit more interesting in that, and interesting in the sense that it's coming from what are hopefully Japanese gamers rather than just people pretending to be Japanese, which is, I'm going to save that for the end of the topic. But for starters, let's get into it. So this is the Japanese petition to cancel Assassin's Creed Shadows and how it's gotten 30,000 signatures. Now, this article in Insider Gaming was written by Grant Taylor Hill on the 2nd of July. As we're going to find out, the amount of signatures has actually increased by quite a significant amount. It's pretty much doubled, to be honest. So let's start off with, so in Japan, a change.org petition has surfaced to ban Assassin's Creed Shadows. It has now been a fair few weeks since Ubisoft lifted the lid on this year's Assassin's Creed title, announcing a dual protagonist adventure set in feudal Japan, a setting that fans have been desperate to experience for years. And I think that's probably one of the biggest understatements out there. Assassin's Creed has always lended itself quite well to especially feudal Japan, but Japan in general. And ever since of Ghost of Tsushima, really, when rather than go for Japan, we went to England, which is the least Assassin's Creed place. I mean, you got the Templars, but it wasn't really about the Templars, it was about Vikings. And Vikings were least assassiny type of culture around. So Ghost of Tsushima has proven that there was definitely a market, which we all knew there was, but Ubisoft, I guess, needed to see that there was a market for a Japanese setting for Assassin's Creed. But as we're about to find out, they may have made a few little blunders. So the article continues by saying, however, Japanese fans of the franchise were quick to voice their disappointment and concern about the game, with the most extreme claims suggesting that Ubisoft is floating racism, and a severe historical inaccuracy in Shadows, which is set to be released in November. Now, continuing on, let's go into why people think this article really doesn't touch too much on the racism side of things, and I really can't find out where that's coming from, particularly from the change.org petition, which we will read. But a lot of the historical inaccuracies are what seem to be annoying the Japanese gamers the most, and rightfully so. So in the article, it says Assassin's Creed Shadows users can assume the role of Neo, shinobi, and Yasuke, a samurai, and the series' first protagonist to be based on a real historical figure. One of the main concerns is that Yasuke is being portrayed as a full-blown respected samurai warrior in Assassin's Creed Shadows, and that is where the historical inaccuracies reportedly begin. So Yasuke was a real character. Character is the wrong word. He is a historical figure. He existed. He was real. And he wasn't a samurai. Now, Yasuke was in the service of Oda Nobunaga. A missionary brought him over to Japan. It was the first time, reportedly, that Japanese people had ever seen someone from Africa, never seen a dark-skinned person before. And then, in fact, they actually tried to scrub him clean. They thought he was very dirty. He was such a skilled fighter that Nobunaga employed him. So we're going to talk a little bit about Yasuke before we get into the, I guess, meat and potatoes of really where the historical inaccuracies actually start. Much about Yasuke is unknown. His birth is unknown. The date of his birth is unknown, though many estimates point towards the 1550s. So we're talking mid-16th century. While he is known to have been from Africa, the exact location of his birth is also unknown. Historians speculate that he may have been born in what is today Ethiopia, Mozambique, or South Sudan, citing evidence collected to his name, his physical appearance as described by his contemporaries, trade relationships among Japan, Europe, and Africa, and other factors. So Yasuke, definitely real. This is coming from Britannica.com, by the way. In 1581, Valentino and Valignano, my Italian's even worse, holy hell, and Yasuke traveled to Kyoto where they met Oda Nobunaga, a powerful daimyo, who was seeking to unify Japan divided by several warlords. According to a contemporary account, Nobunaga was stunned by Yasuke's appearance, both his height and his skin color. So that goes on to the part where I was mentioning that they decided to scrub him clean. They thought he was dirty. They were fascinated. Like Nobunaga and his court were completely fascinated by Yasuke, and particularly his prowess. He was very tall, and his physique. Yasuke immediately gained Nobunaga's favor. Historians assume that Yasuke knew Japan well enough, Japanese well enough to have conversations with Nobunaga, and they also believe that he quickly proved to Nobunaga his skills as a soldier. Soon after their first meeting, Nobunaga granted Yasuke his Japanese name, accepted him into his service, and made him the first recorded foreigner to receive the title of samurai. Very impressive stuff. Yasuke is also one of the few people who dined with Nobunaga, which demonstrated the closeness of their relationship. So yeah, as we'll soon find out. I mean, if you want to do your own research, I thoroughly recommend this part of Japanese history. It's incredibly interesting, particularly about Yasuke. It's very, very, very fascinating. As a samurai, Yasuke would have fought in several battles for Nobunaga, though the exact number is known. His service to Nobunaga was, however, cut short. Yasuke was present at the Hono Temple in Kyoto in 1582, only about a year after they met, when Nobunaga was betrayed by his general, Akechi Mitsuhide. Now, this goes on, so a little bit more. We're kind of skipping into the article just a touch. Nobunaga committed suicide. Yusuke ended up in the employment of Oda Nobunaga's son, Oda Nobutada. Nobunaga's son, but Oda Nobutada was defeated by Mitsuhide and committed seppuku the same day as his father. Defeated, Yasuke was then escorted by Mitsuhide's men to a Jesuit missionary house. Nothing is known of him after that. So he had a very interesting life. He really only spent a year in Nobunaga's court. He was more or less, I suppose, a favored warrior, not really a full-blown samurai. He was basically in the service of Nobunaga, served as one of his trusted soldiers, and 12 months later he was shipped back to a Jesuit missionary house, and who knows what happened to him then. So I believe there is a statue of Yasuke in Japan, but you can't quote me on that. Back to the article Inside Gaming, because it does go a little bit more than just whether or not Yasuke was a samurai or not. And as we will see, there's quite a few, shall we say, missing details, very obvious details. So Assassin's Creed Shadows trailer, especially the one aired in Japanese, picked up pretty awful likes to dislikes ratio. Players in other regions had some issues with the game's flow and overall appearance, with many ruling the fact that it's moving back to the massive open world RPG model that was first introduced in 2017. Thank you for the Insider Gaming article. Naturally, the last part, and before we move into the petition, is obvious. Ubisoft is not going to move away from the open world RPG style of Assassin's Creed, purely and simply because they can monetize it better. It's never going to change. It's absolutely not going to change, unfortunately, because I really do think Assassin's Creed doesn't work as a RPG. Sure, it can be fun. The loot can be okay, but Assassin's Creed is all about that fantasy of being an assassin. Take, for instance, Ghost of Tsushima. It's the perfect example of how to do a Japanese-inspired Assassin's Creed. But open world RPG in Japan can work. I'm betcha it'll be a lot of fun. Combat, though, remains to be seen. Anyway, a little bit of a rant about open world RPG and Assassin's Creed. Personally, for me, Assassin's Creed Odyssey was fine. I really liked Assassin's Creed Origin, but it felt more of a contained experience. It wasn't overblown like Odyssey. Before we continue any further, let's get into the actual petition that's on change.org. So here's the petition. If it is a little bit translated incorrectly, blame Google Translate, not me. Recently, the lack of historical accuracy and the cultural respect has been a serious issue regarding the upcoming game Assassin's Creed Shadows by game developer Ubisoft. The game is based on Japanese samurai and ignores the fact that the samurai were a higher class of warrior and should have been Gokanen, or servants of nobles. In fact, the first European to receive the title of samurai, William Adams, served Tokugawa Ieyasu as a 250 Koko Hatamoto. So I don't know why that part is thrown in. The article, when I first came across the story on Reddit a few days ago, R Gaming did point out that some of the 4 people who started this change.org petition were actually white males. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't seen that article since, and none of the articles here have actually reported that. And I mean, the petition is still up and gained momentum. So it continues by saying, this is a serious insult to Japanese culture and history. It may also be linked to Asian racism. We call on Ubisoft to immediately cancel the release of Assassin's Creed Shadows and show sincere research and respect for Japanese history and culture. We need your signature. So ultimately what the position wants is, again, they want a game to be cancelled, which is not going to. Hopefully they can fix some of the issues we're going to get into, but it really seems, well, it doesn't seem like it. If I was a Japanese gamer and Assassin's Creed was one of my favorite franchises, and suddenly they get things woefully wrong, I would be pretty annoyed as well. And I think some of the things they do get wrong are very, very fixed. In fact, they shouldn't have been needed fixed to begin with. They should have just been, the Google search will find the answer for you. So it's going to go through some of the things that people are saying. So Teo Yu, or fiction, I could forgive it, but I absolutely cannot forgive the blatant lies of being faithful to the historical facts. And Yusuke was a great black samurai. If we leave it as is, people will believe it historical fact. It will lead to the idea that Japanese hid the fact that black people were such great samurai, and will obviously lead to the idea that Japanese people discriminate against black people. Or rather, this is already what is happening with overseas internet users. This is a falsification of Japanese history, insults to Japanese people, and clear discrimination against them. I was a fan of Assassin's Creed series, but when it was released, it was a force pushed into political correctness with black people and LGBTQ+. Yusuke is depicted as a famous samurai who was bowed to, and this is treated as historical fact. They are trying to heroize. Can't believe I can't talk English, let alone pronounce Japanese words, black people, and spread a false history to the world. The false history of Yusuke is thought to be due to the book Nobunaga and Yasuke, the black samurai who served Onojoji Temple by Thomas Locke. The false history was already spread across overseas, and the Brazilian embassy in Japan also tweeted a statement that Yusuke was a hero. This is a falsification of history. We cannot ignore it. In addition, looking at the game content and the manufacturer's response, I do not feel any respect for Japan. I did not feel any respect for Japan. It is unbearable to watch a black samurai slaughtering Japanese people. Reject here. And there's a lot more like that. So the main gist of the petition simply is that people are kind of fed up with how it's portraying Yusuke. So it's portraying him as someone who people respected, when, as we've seen, that's clearly not the case. Oda Nobunaga respected him, but only as a warrior. He did dine with Nobunaga, so there maybe was a little bit of mutual respect, but to say that people were bowing to him is a little bit strange. I don't know why that's in the game. I'm also not 100% sure why, if we'll see the trailer in a little bit, it really does show Yasuke just cutting down Japanese officials. They do have swords. He just beats them up. There's no context in the game. It's just a trailer. It's kind of a simple game trailer. But when you put it in the context of this petition, suddenly you're like, it is a little bit odd. It is a little bit strange. So this article, kind of steamrolling ahead here, but this article is actually posted on Automation, by Amber V, and it goes into a little bit more detail about the historical inaccuracies in Assassin's Creed Shadow. Ubisoft's upcoming Sengoku period RPG, Assassin's Creed Shadows, caused audiences to polarize around the decision to cast the historical Yasuke as a protagonist. Some finding it evasive of Japanese people, others finding the blend of a real life fiction and fascinating, and others finding the blend of real life and fiction fascinating. Wow, that was tough. On the other hand, the game has also gotten Japanese users almost unanimously annoyed with a series of glaring historical inaccuracies that are visible in the recently released trailer. This is where we're going to get into the more, I would say, slightly egregious errors. With Yasuke being front and center and slaughtering Japanese people, I can't talk. Being Japanese, I can't imagine what that must feel like or seem like. I did find it quite odd that Yasuke was going to be a protagonist in Assassin's Creed Shadows. I found that quite weird. Despite the setting, I thought it would have been more accurate to have him as a companion or a side character rather than a main character, as it probably would fit easier. You could ignore that, however. As a Western, coming from a purely Western perspective, you'd probably ignore that if the game was fun without these other details. And once you become aware of these details, it does call into question how much liberty Ubisoft is taking with historical fact. So the article continues. The Assassin's Creed series, while fictional, is known for a good deal of well-researched, accurate depictions of historical locations from around the world. After all, 3D data of the Notre Dame the 3D data of the Notre Dame Cathedral. That's why that word is so weird. There's a word missing, of the Notre Dame. That's why it was tripping me up. See, it's not just me. Created for Assassin's Creed Unity, was accurate enough to serve as a reference for the cathedral's restoration after it burned down in 2019. However, the story of moving to feudal Japan in Assassin's Creed Shadows, it seems the developers are not managing to meet expectations for historical accuracy. First one off the bat. The offending sequence depicts Lord Oda Nobunaga, one of the most influential figures of the time, in a forum with his vassals. One of the biggest issues with the scene is the architecture. Japanese users aren't really sure what kind of room this interior is supposed to be depicting. In terms of Japanese architecture, the ceilings of the room seems impossibly high, the sliding shoji and doors are extremely tall, and the tatami mats are of a non-standard square shape, as opposed to rectangular, with non-uniform borders. Users have commented that the tatami mats look more like a tatami-esque flooring than the real thing. As opposed to most Western styles of architecture, traditional Japanese architecture is based on the eye level of a person seated on the floor, which is why the high ceiling immediately makes the supposedly traditional room look jarring. As a result, many users got the impression that Nobunaga and his generals are perhaps seated in a high school dojo, ready to do some judo throws. And yeah, once you see it, you really kind of can't unsee it. If I was just zoom back in, you can actually, that does not look like a Japanese hall where you're going to meet arguably one of the most important, if not the most important person at the time in a meeting regarding, I guess, back and move forward. It really does look like, high school dojo. Now, just to get an idea of what they're talking about in the article regarding Japanese architecture, in particular the tatami mats, this is what it should look like. You can see very low ceiling, and this is just a simple Google search. As we'll see, this would fix a lot of issues. Just a simple Google search. So this is what it should look like: long rectangular mats, very low ceiling. It's quite an intimate space. We go back to what we see in the trailer, and it's just this huge, massive auditorium-like building. A little bit jarring. Continuing on. On the topic of being seated, the same scene from Assassin's Creed Shadows trailer also makes some serious etiquette-related faux pas. For starters, when one of Nobunaga's aides is seated at the same level as his lord, as opposed to joining everyone else on the lower level. Additionally, the generals appear to be sitting Caesar style, a sitting position that only became standard for warriors later in the Tokugawa period. For the given historical cultural context, a cross-legged position would have been more correct. Additionally, some of the supposedly noblemen seem to be sitting on top of the borders between tatami mats, which suggests they don't know their manners. So, there you go. Another big simple thing that to get wrong in a supposedly historically accurate game, when Ubisoft has put a lot of detail in recreating arguably one of the most boring landscapes ever. No offense to English people, but England before William the Conqueror isn't a landscape that lends itself to interest. Sure, you've got castles, but that's about it. You're going to Japan, arguably a little bit later, 5.5 centuries back, so things have progressed, but it's a stark difference. You put so much effort into recreating 10th, 11th century England, yet they seem to have skipped some steps here in 16th century Japan. Furthermore, the characters appearing before Lord Nobunaga in the Assassin's Creed Shadows trailer have had hair styled in top-knot characteristic of the Edo period, which came later, which obviously came after the Sengoku period. In addition to the lackluster costume design, these decisions gave many users the impression of a congregation of Edo period townsfolk rather than a Sengoku period war council. So just to give everyone an idea, this is what was more or less traditionally worn in the Sengoku period. A little bit different. This is from sengokudaimo.com, or where you can talk, they really just highlight Japanese clothing and throughout different periods. So it's women clothing down here, but the most important one is the men's clothing. And if we go back and have a look at there, yep, definitely looks cross-legged as well. But Edo period clothing looks more like this. So you can see that's probably what a lot more people are used to. Yeah, this is Edo period clothing. Images. As you can see, this is just a Google search. I haven't done anything special. So yeah, Edo period clothing. What's this one? There we go. So a little bit of a faux pas, like just a little bit, just a tinsy bit. What's worse though is Oda Nobunaga himself. On the topic of costumes, the Nobunaga family crest seen on Oda Nobunaga's robe is pasted upside down. So this is, where is it? This is the Oda clan symbol. As you can see, kind of like a flower in the middle. You've got 5 lines around here and a break in the dead center. Almost looks like a fan. If you have a look at the trailer, the break is up top. So they've just pasted it upside down. That's basic stuff. But most of all, people seem to be disenchanted with the apparent non-involvement of Japanese design experts or supervisors in the game's development. As one user points it, yes, it's just entertainment. I'm not the type to nitpick, but the way it shows that there are no Japanese people on the team kind of makes me sad. End of the article. Thank you very much for Amber V. And that's really just it, isn't it? When you're making an Assassin's Creed game that is going to have a very, very broad audience, in one of the time periods that a lot of people have requested for a long, long time, you want to make it as accurate as possible, particularly when your recent games have given people the chance to see periods of time that they wouldn't normally think about. History. If you're not interested, I love ancient history. Even for me, going back and actually playing through some of these, fascinating. And I can't imagine what it must be like for people who don't know about history to go and revisit Turkey, see the Hagia Sophia, going back to Africa, even ancient Greece, places like that, and have an idea of what it's like. This might be minor to a lot of people, the flowers upside down or the flooring might not be correct. You may not understand that. It may not even go brush straight over you, but the mere fact that they've done it shows just a little lack of care. Imagine if, for me, living in Brisbane, they decide to do Assassin's Creed, and I mean, this doesn't affect me the same way it will affect Japanese players and Japanese people. They make a game, Assassin's Creed game in Brisbane, and the story bridge is on the other side. They've moved it down a kilometer, so it's going over Toowong, not into New Farm or Fortitude Valley. And this is the point. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it. It still works. It gets you from north to south, but the wrong area. It doesn't change Brisbane a great deal. You can still do what you got to do. The point is, it just shows that lack of care. And I actually think this petition, which, by the way, where are we at? 71,097 people have signed it. I actually agree with it. Now, will Ubisoft cancel? No, of course not. They're not going to cancel Assassin's Creed. They never will. But I agree with this petition. I think it has some merit here, particularly when Ubisoft standards seem to be falling. When they put such detail in Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Assassin's Creed Mirage, and again, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I don't want to beat that drum, but 11th century, 10th century England, not the most interesting landscape to be in. So when you've got such an amazing period of time, feudal Japan, the architecture, the colors of the landscape, and the gorgeous clothing on display, not to mention getting into sort of samurai and sword fighting and that feudalism combat, it's disappointing that they've let this slide. We'll see what happens. So far, not many news articles are talking about it. The last time this was posted, I think the automation article by Amber V was on the 21st of May. So we're now into July. Hopefully this gets some traction. I'd like to see some more people talking about it. I might even try and tweet out to Ubisoft. Pardon me. We'll see what happens there. Probably nothing. But yeah, that's it. Let me know what you think regarding the Assassin's Creed Shadow controversy, whether or not you agree with it or whether or not you disagree with it. I'd really like to hear your opinion. Dum 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 dum. Do 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 do. Da da dum dum da dum dum. Do da 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 da. Do 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 do. Do 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 dum 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 do 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 dum 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 do 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 do